All right, I mentioned concerning the returns back to Judah from Babylon. I mentioned several times, I referenced, I should say, the book of Ezra. And in reality, the book of Ezra, as I mentioned, is scattered out over a long period of time. And the book as well includes several different returns, at least a couple. The first one is when Zerubbabel and his group returns. And then a little bit after that, it mentions the return of Ezra and so on. So under the return of Ezra, it talks about how far it was. And so I took several of those and put them together, and I never clarified to you which one was which. So if you would go to the book of Ezra, Ezra chapter 1. And I want to give you a couple of indicators as concerning the times that we're looking at. And we can reckon this with the times of the Babylonian and the Persian kings, especially the Persian kings, and not the Babylonian kings. Babylonians kept them in Babylon. The Persian kings released them several different times. In Ezra chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia." Okay, so Cyrus, the first year of his reign, that would be in 538 BC. The Bible says that in the book of Daniel very clearly. So 538, Cyrus. All right, that's very clear. Go to Ezra chapter 4, and then it talks about a lot of things. Not chapter 4, sorry, chapter 5. They come to Judah in chapters 1 through 4. They begin the foundation. End of chapter 3, the old men, the ancient men, the Bible calls them. I hope I never get called that. That had seen the first house, the first temple. When they saw the second temple, they cried, they wept, because it wasn't nearly the same. In chapter 5 then, actually go to the end of chapter 24. Then it leads into chapter 5, verse 1. Chapter 4, verse 24. "Then ceased the work of the house of God," which is at Jerusalem. "So it ceased unto the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia," or Darius. Okay? I have studied many different timelines and chronologies. And this one, I've mentioned this to you a few weeks ago. This book is very, very accurate on their timelines. And here on page 69, it lists out a bunch of the kings of Neo-Babylonia. Now, the only thing that means, Babylon was a city, obviously, for millennia, or at least a millennia, before Nebuchadnezzar comes on the scene. So what's typically reckoned as about 605 or 620, or somewhere around that time, 625 BC, till the fall of Babylon, almost 100 years later. That's called Neo-Babylonia. So Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler before him, Nabopolassar, then Nebuchadnezzar, and then several others, the last one of which is Nabonidus, and his co-ruler was Belshazzar. And that's why Belshazzar is mentioned in that story. Well, anyway, 539, Babylon falls to the Persians, and the first king of the Persians is Cyrus. The second king of the Persians, as my next page then has the chronology of the Persian period. Okay, and this is very accurate. I've reckoned these dates across with other chronologies that are wrong, I believe. All conservative. These dates fit the Bible dates. Critical texts have the dates mixed up because they don't reckon with the biblical dates. What's the main biblical date? The what do you call it? The linchpin. What's the linchpin? Yes?
Solomon's temple.
Solomon's temple being built in 966 BC. Okay, that is the linchpin. And everything comes forward, everything goes back from that. So anyway, so this follows that biblical time dating period. So Cyrus, first year, 539. Second year, 538, he releases Zerubbabel. Darius the first, 522. What does this say? In the second year of the reign of Darius, that'd be 521 or 520, depending on how they reckoned it. Chapter 5, verse 1. Then the prophets, Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. Remember I told you last class period that these last three prophets of the Old Testament, were post-exile. They were post-exile. Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Haggai, Zechariah about 520. Malachi about 420. So this, chapter 5, verse 1, these two prophets prophesied unto the Jews that were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel and to them, and said, get with it. Let's rebuild. Excuse me. Let's rebuild, finish building, I should say, the temple. So the next date that is found in the book of Ezra is 520. That would be Haggai and Zechariah. All right, so these two prophets, read through their books. That's exactly what they said. Okay, get on the ball. Let's go. So Ezra said that they prophesied. You read their books, they did, about the rebuilding of the temple. Chapter 6, verse 1. Then Darius the king made a decree. They find this information, this document, the loss of which had caused them to stop building. Haggai and Zechariah said, keep building anyway. They literally said, keep building. Eventually, God will work things out. We're going to keep building. And so they find the document after all in chapter 6. Now, chapter 7, verse 1. Now, after these things, by the way, they finished the work of the house of God and the end of chapter 6. Chapter 7, verse 1. Now, after these things, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, the son of son of Sariah, and so on, names off a bunch of people. Go down to verse number 6. This Ezra went up from Babylon. Okay, now, when did Artaxerxes reign? Well, go to page 70 here of my chronology of the Persian period. You've got Cyrus, Cambyses, Darius the first, Xerxes, 486 to 464. We see this in all kinds of Persian history. You can find these things even today because of archaeology. And then Artaxerxes the first. By the way, Xerxes 486 to 464. He probably, if he's the king of Babylon and Esther is the queen of Babylon, Xerxes the first was the husband of Esther. Xerxes the first also and we'll touch on this when we come to the Greeks. Xerxes the first instigated several huge wars against the Greeks. Have you ever heard of, not Thermopylae, Salamis, there's another one. Anyway, he was a very vain king. The story is that he sat up on a hillside expecting his troops to rout the Greeks, and it was reversed on him. He had 1 million, supposedly, according to Josephus, he had 1 million-man army and lost. He did a lot of really foolish. Persian kings, we'll get to them. They are known for their inability to win wars. It's unbelievable, and they had huge armies. Well, anyway, that's Xerxes. Artaxerxes, 464 to 423, he's the king, and we know this in Persian history, and here biblical history reckons the same thing. This Ezra went up from Babylon in the reign of Artaxerxes. So it doesn't tell us a year of Artaxerxes. It just tells us during his reign. He reigned for about 35 years. So it probably took place about 458 BC. The return of Ezra. He was a scribe in the law of Moses. Have you ever heard of the JEDP theory? Have you ever heard of the later writers that supposedly came along and compiled the books of Moses? Ezra usually gets the credit for it from the Bible critics. They say that it was written, the books of Moses written by Ezra. Some of them say that. And it's because of chapter 7, verse 6, he was a ready scribe in the law of Moses. What does that mean to you? Right. He copied the law of Moses, and he was an expert in the law of Moses. That's all that means.
So in a way, it's kind of like someone that edits a book from the previous time and accrediting them to writing the book when they really didn't. Right? I mean, isn't that basically what he did?
Yeah, to an extent.
Like Josephus' works, if you look it up, the author is going to say who the editor is, even though
right.
It's Josephus.
Well, I'm thinking that's true. Even in the law of Moses, there are notes added by somebody else. Mm-hmm. That the copies that we have today, little statements like "unto this day," mm-hmm. somebody included that, saying it's still there. A lot of times it's in parentheses. There's not many of them, but if it's in parentheses, there'll be a note identifying an ancient city such as Arba. What is Arba? Which is Hebron. It'll have that in parentheses. And so somebody probably added that note later on. We don't know who. Could have been Moses. Could have been as late as Ezra, for all we know. So there's nothing wrong with putting something in parentheses to identify something. I don't believe. Okay, so chapter 7 then through chapter 10 are about the return of Ezra back to the land of Judah, back to Jerusalem. Okay, so you've got 3 different dates in the book of Ezra. 538, chapters 1 through 4. 5 and 6 are about 520 BC, and then 458, which is why I said to you the other day, the beginning of the book of Ezra may not even have been alive yet, because if he was 1 year old in 538, how old does that make him in 458? He was about 70 years old. So he was definitely not writing when Ezra chapter 1 actually happened. Okay, he'd been 90-something years old, and traveling all over the world. Okay, any questions on that?
I was going to say, verse 7, it says, I think this is the same time period. Verse 6, it says it was in the 7th
year. Let me see if that matches my chronology here, which is probably why they put it at 458. 464 to 458 is 6 years. In the 7th year. Yep. Any of these years, you never know, because they can easily go a year or two one way or the other because of how they reckoned a part of a year as a whole year, and so anything like that. If you're within 2 or 3 years, you're safe. Anyway, it's 2,500 years ago, so it's not going to make too much of a difference. Okay, now let me say this also. Go to the book of Nehemiah then. Go to Nehemiah. I'm talking about different kings of Persia, kings of Babylon. Look at chapter 2, verse 1. Chapter 2, verse 1. We know what happens in chapter 1. He hears about the walls of Jerusalem still being destroyed, burnt with fire, and so on. Chapter 2, verse 1, it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. What's the 20th year? It started in 464. So around 444. So you'll often see 445 or 444 as the year that Nehemiah returned back to Jerusalem. Okay, that is first few chapters. Going down, I think I have it right down towards the end of the book. I made a note here as well. Go to chapter 12. Ezra chapter 12, verse 36, the end of the verse. Ezra the scribe before them. So Ezra and Nehemiah were at Jerusalem at the same time. All right. There's a passage. Okay. Okay. Oh, there it is. Chapter 13, verse 6. Chapter 13, verse 6. He's saying about one of the enemies of God who had actually moved into a storage room of the temple. There was a storage room. You imagine their tithes back in those days, okay? In our day, we bring money to the storehouse. In those days, they brought wheat and barley and oil and wine and, I mean, you list it, you name it, they brought it, you know. So they had to have huge storage rooms as part of the temple. To this day, under the Temple Mount, it's not just a big filled-in mass. There's huge rooms, and storage rooms were probably used as storage rooms at one point that are underneath the Temple Mount. Anyway, this Samaritan, they're not called Samaritans yet, but this foreigner had moved into a room in the house of God. Now, verse 6 says, "But in all this time was not I at Jerusalem." So Nehemiah tells us that he had at one point, he had come to Jerusalem, he had been there for a number of years, and then left. We don't know when he left, but he left. We do know when he returned, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes. So 12 years after the first time he had come, he returns a second time. "I came to Jerusalem and understood of the evil of this man living in the temple. And, oh boy, verse 8, it grieved me sore, therefore I cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber." Cleansed the chambers. And anyway. Okay, so we'll get to that, but I wanted you to see how the Persian kings and the timeline of the Persian kings fits with the Bible narrative. Book of Ezra, the book of Nehemiah, and if you're like me and you love history, I love to see the fact that the Bible, I know it is, I trust the Bible, I'm just saying I love to see how the Bible is historically accurate. And it names actual people who lived there at that time, who were kings, and so on. Okay, I wanted to clarify that. I felt like I just kind of quickly rushed through Ezra. I wanted you to get a big picture of what Ezra and Nehemiah were about. We'll come and we'll work our way through them. Ezra records, as I mentioned, 4 different attempts to stop the work of God at Jerusalem. Okay, so there's 4 attempts. The first one are when some Samaritan enemies of Benjamin and Judah tried to join the workforce and to undermine the efforts. Okay, these are not called Samaritans. In the Bible, I looked it up before I came, there's only one reference to Samaritans in the Old Testament. And I don't remember where it was. It's in the book of 2 Kings. There's no reference to Samaritans in Ezra or Nehemiah or any of the other prophetic writings. The next time Samaritan or Samaritans is used is in the New Testament. Okay? So the group known as the Samaritans in the New Testament had their founding, their roots, of course, in the northern kingdom after it fell. Now, without giving away, we're going to do a lesson on the Samaritans later. So I just want you to know, when we call them Samaritan enemies, it probably would be better written Samarian. They're from Samaria. That's it. So, anyway, the point is, what did they try to do? Go to the book of Ezra and we'll see what they attempted to do. They tried to join together with the workforce that was going on. Chapter 4, verse 1. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers and said to them, let us build with you, for we seek your God as ye do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assur, which brought us up hither. All right, 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 24. 2 Kings 17:24 says that they tried to actually worship God, 17:24. King of Assyria brought men from Babylon and from these other places. Verse 25, it was at the beginning of their dwelling there that they feared not the Lord. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which slew some of them. Wherefore they spake to the king of Assyria, saying, the nation which thou hast removed and placed in the city of Samaria know not the manner of the God of the land. Therefore he has sent lions among them. Behold, they slay them, because they know not the manner of the God of the land. So what did the king of Assyria do? He commanded that they carry thither one of the priests whom ye brought from thence, and let them go and dwell there, and let him teach them the manner of the God of the land. Remember me talking about the God of the land? This is not a right, true worship of God. This is simply recognizing that there's a God in every land, and if you live in a land, you ought to worship that God. This is not a reverence, a true reverence for Jehovah God. It's very important to understand that. So, these Samaritans, they don't worship God correctly. They worship a God that they have recognized as the God of their land. Yes?
I think verse 29 has the reference to Samaritans.
Yes, I knew it was in this chapter somewhere. I couldn't remember. I didn't want to look for it. You're right. 2 Kings 17:29 has the reference to the Samaritans. Is the only reference in the Old Testament. Okay? Any questions on that? So, that's the their effort to join in the work. Now, wouldn't that be difficult? Hey, we want to come build with you. We're on your side. Well, it became obvious real quick that they really weren't on their side. Look what Zerubbabel and Jeshua, those are the two leaders, look what they did. They said to them, ye have nothing to do with us to build an house unto our God. See, they recognized that their God and the God of those Samaritans was a different God. Even though they claimed the same God, they had a different God. By the way, understand that the struggle going on in Israel, the Palestinians and the Jews, the Jewish people, that struggle is an old struggle. Okay? That struggle's been going on since the days of the northern kingdom of Israel being taken down. This is a struggle, it's ongoing. Okay, it's foreigners against Jews, foreigners who have moved in and taken over the land, Jews, and this struggle will continue until one or the other is destroyed, and I think I know who it is. Okay, so this struggle is nothing new. By the way, the lies and the deceptions that go on about the Jews and about the Palestinians, that's nothing new. That's been going on for years and years. They've been saying, well, we were here first. We own the land. You know, we worship the same God. You're the ones who are twisting the story, on and on. If you ever hear stories on CNN, you know, about the Jews and about Israel, pretty much the opposite is true. I've seen that numerous times. Anyway, so they said, we want to build with you. And they said, no, you have nothing to do with our God. Then, verse 4, then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building. So the second thing they tried to do is mount a campaign of discouragement. They weakened their hands. Then, when that didn't work, they hired counselors, by the way, to frustrate their purpose. All the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. In the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. By the way, Ahasuerus, Xerxes, the husband of Esther, Say, well, what in the world? That doesn't look the same to me, right? Xerxes and Ahasuerus. They are actually very simple in that language, the Aramaic language, not the Arabic language. Okay, so in the days of Artaxerxes, they wrote letters. There they go. They wrote letters. Listen to their look at this. We have an actual copy of their letter. Isn't that amazing? When I think about that, I think, wow, this is really amazing. We have a copy of a Persian letter in the Bible. Names of verse 9. Named in the rest of the nations, whom the great and noble Asnapper brought over and set in the city of Samaria, and the rest are on this side of the river at such a time. This is the copy of the letter sent unto him, even unto Artaxerxes the king. Thy servants, the men on this side of the river, and at such a time, be it known unto the king that the Jews which came up from thee to us are come unto Jerusalem, building the rebellious and the bad city, and have set up the walls thereof and joined the foundations. Looks like a counseling room note going home to mama. Be it known now unto the king that if this city be builded and the walls set up again, that they will not pay toll, tribute, and custom. And so shalt thou shalt damage the revenue of the kings. Now because we have maintenance from the king's palace, and it was not meet for us to see the king's dishonor, therefore have we sent and certified the king, that search be made in the book of the records of thy fathers, so shalt thou find in the book of the records, and know that this city is a rebellious city and hurtful unto kings and provinces, and that they have moved sedition within the same of old time, for which cause was this city destroyed. Are they right? That's not the end of the letter, but are they right? Has this been a rebellious and bad city? Absolutely. But it wasn't, that's not the problem. The problem is their sin, but still, they're right. We certify the king that if this city be building in the walls thereof set up, by this means thou shalt have no portion on this side of the river. They're gonna stop paying tribute and taxes and tolls and so on. So the king sent an answer, and here's what the king said. Isn't that amazing? We have a king's letter of Persia back to these Samaritans. Peace, and at such a time, end of verse 17. The letter which he sent us hath been plainly read before me, and I commanded, and search hath been made, and it is found that this city of old time hath made insurrection against kings. Oh yeah. Well, he found what they wanted him to find. Because later on in chapter 6, verse 1, they make a search and they find the original document from Cyrus giving them permission to go. But here all he finds is the history of Jerusalem. And of course, because of that, he says that the work on Jerusalem has to stop. Verse 21, give ye now commandment to cause these men to cease. All right, verse 23. Oh, I love this. Can you imagine that? Here comes the messenger from 900 miles away. 500 is direct. From 900 miles, here comes the messenger with this letter. Now, when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum and Shimshai the scribe and their companions, these are the bad guys, they went up in haste to Jerusalem unto the Jews and made them to cease by force and power. Then ceased the work of the house of God at Jerusalem. By the way, what were they doing at Jerusalem? Were they doing the things that they were charged with doing? And have set up the walls thereof and joined the foundations. That's what they were being accused of doing. They're setting up the walls and the foundations. But it wasn't the city walls. It wasn't the city foundations they were setting. It was the temple foundation. So they were being lied about, really, is what's going on. Anyway. Okay, so the work finally is ceased when stopped when force was used. Work on the temple was stopped for about 16 years until Haggai and Zechariah get the thing moving again. The elders of the Jews are able to obtain a written reversal of the order to stop working. In fact, a new decree from Darius allowing the work to proceed because of finding that letter of Cyrus, the original document giving them permission. All right? You think that's interesting? I think that's just very interesting. We've got Persian, we have diplomatic relations going on here, and we read about it in the Bible. All right, the next main point then is about Haggai's exhortations. Well, oh, shoot. I was looking at my watch the wrong way. We'll look at his exhortations and probably even the next thing concerning Haggai and Zechariah. Haggai's exhortations delivered between August and December 520 challenged the people to put the building of the temple above their own home building. Let's turn to Haggai. Little bitty book, 2 chapters, but in chapter 1, verse 1. In the 2nd year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, in the 1st day of the month, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, sometimes called Jeshua, the son of Josedek, the high priest, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, This people say, the time is not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built. Then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye people, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? Right? You've probably heard this preached on. It's time to build the house of God. Let your own house be put off if you have to. But they, of course, by this time, they'd already moved into their own houses. Verse 14. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, spirit of Joshua, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people, and they came and did work in the house of the Lord of hosts, their God, in the 24th day of the 6th month, in the 2nd year of the reign, in the 2nd year of Darius the king. By the way, they didn't wait for the decree, I don't believe. They started working. Anyway, you have a section there on the greater glory of the second temple. In his second of 4 messages to the people, as we find in Haggai, the book of Haggai, he assured them that the very modest temple they were building would enjoy a greater glory and importance than the splendid temple of Solomon which preceded it. Now, this is that section I mentioned a couple days ago, where we see that the second temple actually had more glory than the first. Why? Why? I love this part. Malachi the prophet predicted that the Messiah would come into this very temple, bringing it honor and glory beyond the wealth of gold and silver. Malachi 3:14. I don't know. I get. Okay, sorry, I got the wrong one there.
Is it 110?
I don't know. I don't know. Okay, well, never mind. I have the wrong verse written down there.
Oh, Haggai 2:9?
I don't know. Haggai 2:9. Well, there's where it talks about, but there's a section, I read it here a while back. There's a verse in the book of Malachi that actually predicts this, and I don't remember where it's at. Okay, well, I've got the wrong verse there. On the south end of the temple, of the Temple Mount, there are what you can see what's left of several gates. And there was a set of 2 gates and a set of 3 gates. One's called the Huldah Gate. I forget the name of the other entryway. But anyway, they're all filled in now, and part of one of those sets of gates is covered up with some medieval castle or something ridiculous. But those gates are the gates that were built there by Herod the Great. There's steps leading up to those gates, and I would love to be able to go through those gates and underneath the Temple Mount and up into up onto the mount from there. Those used to be, in the days of Christ, certainly, that was one major avenue for people to go up onto the Temple Mount. So when we were there, you can stand there. Anyway, there's been lots of pictures I've seen. Mr. Porzinski's got a picture there in his office of him standing at the spot where those gates led up. But if you can picture Jesus as a boy coming there with Joseph and Mary and walking up, and they would have gone through those gates. Okay, they entered into that Temple Mount and onto that Temple Mount. And I just love to think of that. It was fulfilled. There's no question. Jesus spent time in the temple. Luke chapter 2 tells us that. Yes?
I think it's Malachi
3:1. 3:1? Yes, there it is. Thank you. Malachi 3:1. All right, maybe I had 1 through 4 and I missed the through. Malachi 3:1. Behold, I will send my messenger, that's John the Baptist, and he shall prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple. So Malachi prophesied that Jesus would come to this temple. Even the messenger of the covenant whom ye delight in, behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. Anyway, so Malachi chapter 3, verse 1. Thank you very much. All right, so the temple was completed 4 years later, 515. 515, 516. What is that? I'll put 515 down. What had happened 70 years before 538? Okay, what would 70 years would be? That would be about 708. Well, 705 was when the first deportation took place. That's about 70 years. The exile. If you say the exile started when Jerusalem was destroyed from 586 to 516, that's also 70 years. All right, so the temple was completed. God was pleased with the newly built second temple. He took up his abode with his people. This temple was without the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, I believe, was destroyed in the burning of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Either way, it has not been found. I don't care what YouTube tells you. A 7-branch menorah stood in the holy place instead of the 10 lamp stands in Solomon's temple. First Maccabees of the apocryphal books talks about the details of its furnishing. Okay? Now you can laugh about those, but is that what you're laughing about? Yeah. But still, I know the apocryphal books are not inspired of God, but there are many details that about this time period we would not know without the apocryphal books. They were written during this time period. Okay? That doesn't mean they're completely accurate, but neither was Josephus. And we read Josephus. And we read Herodotus, a Greek historian, and he wasn't completely right. So anyway, there are details that we can at least use for our studies. They burnt incense on the altar. They lit the lamps on the lampstand. When they put the bread of the presence on the table and hung the curtain, their work was completed. First Maccabees 4. All right? So
Should we turn there?
I don't have my apocryphal books. Do you? Anybody have the Catholic Bible?
Your copies if you guys need them.
Right.
Very devotional.
In general, of the temple built by Zerubbabel, little is known. Benjamin Matsar, that's a name that you should recognize from that video we watched a few weeks ago. It is most difficult, he said, it is most difficult to determine, even in general outlines, the stages in the historical development of the Temple Mount and its fortifications during the long era of the Second Temple, from Zerubbabel to the commencement of Herod's building project at the end of the 1st century. About 500 years. We think in terms of 25 years, Their buildings lasted for 500 years and more. Okay? Temple Mount is very, very much more detailed than you think. If you go there today, you just think that it's this big, huge block. And if you look closely, and if you study about the Temple Mount, you find out all of these little interesting things that you don't see when you just look at it the first time. For example, on the east side of the Temple Mount, the city wall, the Temple Mount wall is one there. It goes for, I think, about a quarter mile or so. But right towards the south end of that, as you're going along, and I'll start at the north, as you're going along, it just curls a little bit out at one spot. And you can easily, if you stand on this corner, the southeast corner, and you look along that wall, you can easily see where all of a sudden it's coming in a straight line, and all of a sudden it curves out. Somebody messed up. I don't know what happened. But this is obviously the wall used to go to this point. And then they extended it, and their level or their square wasn't very straight or something. But somebody messed up. Anyway, there's a lot of little things like that. On the south end of this, down here underneath this area, you can see burn marks way underneath the Temple Mount. It happened almost for sure when Herod's temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Lots of little features, different types of stones as you go up. The bottom stones are different than the top stones. Different cuts on them and so on because of who put them there and so on. There's so many little details like that are very interesting. But this second temple from Zerubbabel, what's left of it is way underground. Okay, there just isn't much evidence left concerning the details of it. Of course, what we find is in the apocryphal books, and some of that isn't too trustworthy. All right. You have a section there on no kings in Israel. I'll touch on this here. Israel's exile for 70 years in Babylon marked a new era of government for God's chosen people. Oh, they wouldn't have kings for a long period of time. They would be ruled by high priests under the authority, ultimately under the authority of the Persians, under the authority of the Greeks. Then, for a while, they threw off the authority of the Greeks, and they had another set of kings. What do we call those set of kings? The Hasmonean dynasty. And then we moved from there, of course, to the Romans. And they were definitely, the Herods. Several layers of government there. That were over Israel. But as a whole, Israel wouldn't have kings for a long period of time. The kings of the Hasmonean dynasty were not in the line of David and so on. Okay, they were not. They're typically not even looked at as kings. They were ruled by a dynasty, but not necessarily kings. Luke 21:24, Jesus references the times of the Gentiles. The times of the Gentiles, and that phrase is used by Paul the Apostle as well. Times of the Gentiles. That's the time when Israel doesn't have a king. They're ruled by the Gentiles. There's a bunch of them, as I mentioned, Persians, Greeks, Romans. The times of the Gentiles. Since the last king sat on the throne of Israel, those people have had no king over them to the present day. Jerusalem has been trodden down by the Gentiles. After the Romans, of course, came the Arabs, the Turks, the French, the British. In spite of national independence and statehood in 1948, Israel has no central authority figure in charge. To this day, there is no king in Israel. Every man is that which is right in his own eyes, right? That's the rest of the verse. But there's no king. They have a prime minister, but even he is overruled or whatever, countered by those, what do they call them? Their cabinet or whatever, who meet at the Knesset. That's their main government building. The situation will soon change. A king and a priest in the line of David is due to return to the throne of a united, restored Israel in the near future. All the prophets speak of this event. Have you heard of Isaiah 9:6? Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God. That's his name. Haggai talked about this message in Haggai 2:23, promising Israel final overthrow of all her enemies and a special royal blessing for Zerubbabel. Earlier, God had sworn that no king in the bloodline of Jeconiah, that's the last king, a different name for him, would sit upon the throne of Israel in Jeremiah 22. Joseph was of the line of that family. He was not a king. Zerubbabel was of that line. He was not a king. Jerubbaal, not Zeru. Anyway, there's Luke 3:27 mentions some of the family history leading to Mary, and through Mary, Jesus. We'll come to that later. I don't want to go into that yet. Zechariah the prophet lived and wrote during early Second Temple times. One of his most interesting prophecies concerning Messiah centers around the future reunification of the offices of king and priest in Israel in chapter 14. Let's go to Zechariah. A couple pages back. I'm still in Malachi. Go to Zechariah chapter 14. Verse number 2. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the cities shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half the cities shall go forth into captivity. We don't know exactly when that was. It might have been when the Romans were there. I don't know. But the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and on the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, and there shall be a very great valley. He's coming back. Verse 9, the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day shall there be one Lord, and his name one. King. King. There's a long time period without any king in Israel. But we literally go from the last king of the southern kingdom of Judah to Jesus Christ. That's the way it'll happen. Okay, yes. Oh, any questions, comments on that? All right, we'll stop there. Ezra's return to rebuild the people, 458.